Hello and welcome to the History of Tobacco Part 3, Modern History. A historian of American South in the late 1860s reported a typical usage in the region where it was grown. The chewing of tobacco was well nigh universal. This habit had been widespread among the agricultural population of America, both north and south, before the war. Soldiers had found the quid a solace in the field and continued to resolve it in their mouths upon returning to their homes. Out of doors, where his life was principally led by the chewer spat upon his hands without offense to other men, and his homes and public buildings were supplied with spittoons. Brown and yellow parabolas were projected to right and left toward these receivers, but very often without the careful aim which made for clean living. Even the pews of fashionable churches were likely to contain these familiar conveniences. The large numbers of Southern men, and these were of the better class, officers in the Confederate Army and planters, worth 20,000 or more, and barred from general amnesty, who presented themselves for the pardon of President Johnson while they sat awaiting their pleasure in the anteroom of the White House, covered its floors with pools and rivulets of their spittle. An observant traveler in the South in 1865 said that, in his belief, 7/10 of all persons above the age of 12 years, both male and female, used tobacco in some form. Women could be seen at the doors of their cabins in their bare feet, their dirty one-piece cotton garments, their chairs tipped back, smoking pipes made of corn cobs into which were fitted reed stems or goose quills. Boys of 8 or 9 years of age and half-grown girls smoked. Women and girls dipped in their houses, on their porches, in the public parlors of hotels, and in the streets. Until 1883, tobacco excise tax accounted for 1/3 of the internal revenue collected by the United States government. Internal Revenue Service data for the 1879-1880 show total tobacco tax receipts of $38.9 million out of total receipts of $116.8 million. Following the American Civil War, the tobacco industry struggled as it attempted to adapt. Not only did the labor force change from slavery to sharecropping, but a change in demand also occurred. As in Europe, there was a desire for not only snuff, pipes, and cigars, but cigarettes as well. With a change in demand and a change in labor force, James Bonsack, an avid craftsman, in 1881 created a machine that revolutionized the cigarette production. The machine chopped the tobacco, then dropped a certain amount of tobacco into a long tube of paper, which the machine would then roll and push out the end, where it would be sliced by the machine into individual cigarettes. This machine operated at 13 times the speed of a human cigarette roller. This caused an enormous growth in the tobacco industry that lasted well into the 20th century, until the scientific revelations discovering health consequences of smoking and tobacco companies' usage of chemical additives was revealed. In the United States, the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act first became law in 2009. It gave the Food and Drug Administration the authority to regulate manufacture, distribution, and marketing of tobacco products to protect the public health concerns. Nazi Germany saw the first modern anti-smoking campaign. The National Socialist government condemning tobacco use, funding research against it, levying increasing sin taxes on it in 1941, banning tobacco in various public places as a health hazard. In the UK and the USA, an increase in lung cancer rates was being picked up by the 1930s, but the cause for this increase remained debated and unclear. A true breakthrough came in 1948 when the British psychologist Richard Dahl published the first major studies that proved that smoking could cause serious health damage. In 1950, he published research in the British Medical Journal that showed a close link between smoking and lung cancer. 4 years later, in 1954, the British doctors' study, a study of some 40,000 doctors over 20 years, confirmed the suggestion based on which the government issued advice that smoking and lung cancer rates were related. The British doctors' study lasted till 2001, with result published every 10 years and final results published in 2004 by Dahl and Richard Peto. Much early research also done by Dr. Oshner, Reader's Digest magazine for many years, published frequent anti-smoking articles. In 1964, the United States Surgeon General's report on smoking and health likewise began suggesting the relationship between smoking and cancer, confirmed its suggestions 20 years later in the 1980s. Partial controls and regulatory measures eventually followed in much of the developed world, including partial advertising bans, minimum age of sale requirements, and basic health warnings on tobacco packaging. However, smoking prevalence and associated ill health continued to rise in the developed world in the first 3 decades following Richard Dahl's discovery, with governments sometimes reluctant to curtail a habit seen as popular as a result, and increasingly organized disinformation efforts by the tobacco industry and their proxies. Realization dawned gradually that the health effects of smoking and tobacco use were susceptible only to a multi-pronged policy response, which combined positive health messages with medical assistance to cease tobacco and use and effective marketing restrictions, as initially indicated in 1916 overview by the British Royal College of Physicians and the 1964 report of the U.S. Surgeon General. In the 1950s, tobacco companies engaged in a cigarette advertising war surrounding the tar content in cigarettes that came to be known as the tar derby. The companies repositioned their brands to emphasize low tar content, filter technology, and nicotine levels. The period ended in 1959 after the Federal Trade Commission chairman and several cigarette company presidents agreed to discontinue usage of tar or nicotine levels in advertisements. In order to reduce the potential burden of disease, the World Health Organization, WHO, successfully rallied 168 countries to sign the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in 2003. The convention is designed to push for effective legislation and its enforcement in all countries to reduce the harmful effects of tobacco. Tobacco in science. The tobacco smoke enema was the principal medical method to resuscitate victims of drowning in the 18th century. As a lucrative crop, tobacco has been the subject of a great deal of biological and genetic research. The economic impact of tobacco mosaic disease, the impetus that led to the isolation of tobacco mosaic virus, the first virus to be identified. The fortunate coincidence is that one of the simplest viruses and can self-assemble from purified nucleic acid and protein lead, and turn to the rapid advancement in the field of virology. In 1946, Nobel Prize in Chemistry was shared with Wendell Meredith Stanley for his 1935 work crystallizing the virus and showing that it remains active. This concludes the history of tobacco, part 3. I hope this helps explain why tobacco use is so prevalent in our history and why it still lingers today in modern society. I also hope with modern technology and science that tobacco use in coming years will hopefully come to an end. I hope you found this information enjoyable. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends and family, letting them know why tobacco is ingrained in our history and also why people should not be using it anymore. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.